Hello and welcome to the Rails Board meeting. I'm Michael Campbell, President of the Rails Board. This is Friday, February 26, 2021, and I call this meeting to order at 1 p.m. Emily, will you please call roll?
Sure. Sue Busenbark.
Here.
Michael Campbell.
Here.
Hallie Cox.
Here.
Percy Harris. Diane Hollister.
Here.
Chris Kenny.
Here.
Sarah McCone Chase.
Here.
Jennifer McIntosh.
Here.
Paul Mills.
Here.
Jenna Nemekluisi.
Here.
Scott Poynton.
Here.
Becky Spradford.
Here.
Thomas Stagg.
Here.
Beth Teppen.
Here.
And Alex Vancina.
Here.
Great. We have a quorum.
Thank you. In accordance with the Government Emergency Administration Act number PA 100-0640, the Rails Board of Directors finds an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent and believes it is in the best interest of Rails to hold a virtual meeting to perform essential business. Everyone, please remember to unmute yourself before you speak and say your name when making a motion or comment. All votes will be by roll call. Thank you. Also, in order to comply with the Open Meetings Act, anyone is allowed to join the meeting as an attendee. Any comments put into the chat during the public comment period will be read aloud. After that time, the chat feature in Zoom will be disabled. Okay. Next off is the guest and public comments. So let's start with guests here in Burr Ridge. Dee, will you start?
Yes, Deirdre Brennan, Rails.
Monica Harris, Rails.
Okay. East Peoria.
Kendall Orison, Rails. Ryan Hebel, Rails. That's it.
Is that it?
Yep.
Illinois State Library.
Greg McCormick.
Okay. Emily, any other guests that we have?
Yes, we have Emily Feister. We have Jim Krieger. Lila Heath, Joe Philippek, Ann Slaughter, Jody Rubel, Mary Witt, and Grant Halter. Did I miss anyone?
If Emily has not read your name, please state your name and your affiliation or put it in the Zoom chat so that she can read it and add your name to the minutes. Any others, Emily?
Nope.
You need to ask
Okay. Anything?
public, no, just public comment.
Emily, did you receive any comments via email?
I did not.
Okay. Do we have any other public comments at this time? Okay. So on to the consent agenda, which includes the items listed in the agenda. Would anyone wish to move any of the items to the regular agenda for further discussion? Okay. May I have a motion and a second for the approval of the consent agenda?
Paul Mills, so moved.
Hallie Cox, second.
Emily, will you please call roll?
Sure. Sue Busenbark,
Yes.
Hallie Cox,
Yes.
Diane Hollister,
Yes.
Chris Kenny,
Yes.
Sarah McCone Chase,
Yes.
Jennifer McIntosh. You're muted.
Yes, sorry.
Paul Mills,
Yes.
Jenna Nemekluisi,
Yes.
Scott Poynton,
Yes.
Becky Spradford,
Yes.
Thomas Stagg,
Yes.
Beth Teppen,
Yes.
Alex Messina,
Yes.
and Michael Campbell.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So next is Jim Kreger with the financial report.
Good afternoon. You have the financial report through January 31st of 2021 in your report. The highlights are our cash balance at the end of January was 16.4 million. That would fund approximately 17.7 months of operations. We continue to work remotely, as you can see. But our delivery operations resumed last June. Our revenues through January were still above budget, 1,125,370, as we received earlier amounts of per capita grants last year, the latest being October 1st. But most of these payments pertain to last year's area and per capita grant. And we will be owed approximately 8.4 million in future. Somebody has
There's
been
some
shuffling.
background. It seems better now. Okay.
Yeah, okay. The investment income remains well below budget, $83,706. It's the interest rates remain well below the 1% budgeted, but they can be somewhat variable. And I have been seeing that the long-term federal rates have been going up a little bit, but we'll be watching that. Our expenditures, general fund expenditures through January were $734,420 below budget, as we have restricted our spending thus far this year. We'll talk more about that later in a later agenda item. Contractual expenditures are the largest area under budget, but we're under budget in virtually all categories. On a percentage budget, the travel expenses, of course, are the highest, being nearly 100% under budget, as our expenses thus far are still under $1,000 for the year, and with no let up yet in sight. We did make payments of our annual insurance coverages during January. Our liability and property coverages went up about 37.8% versus the prior year, and due to the insurance industry's experience with very heavy calamities through the year, which continue. And but this increase will be spread out over the next over this calendar year. So only about half of that will affect this year. On the other hand, our workers' compensation insurance decreased about 9%. And let's see what else here. We do expect to receive the full amount of our grant, area and per capita grant, this for 2020-21, and but we do not know what the timing will be. Going on in our special revenue fund expenditures, we have 3 programs: Census 2020 program and the L2 replacement program. We have concluded our spending on both of these programs, and they're being closed. There is additional spending on the L2 program that will come out of the general fund, and we had budgeted $35,000 for that. And we were also, the third program, which is active, is the ebook program, which was just awarded in the amount of $125,000. So that will be the only program active going forward. One minor, major item on the fraudulent check update. This is not in the report because it just happened yesterday, but we recovered the proceeds of a second check that was stolen in the amount of $33,151.71, and we have been reimbursed for those funds by the bank that had cashed the fraudulent check. So there's one left to go for just under under 30,000. That I think we should be seeing within the next month or so. Are there any questions I can answer?
Hey, Jim, this is Scott. Under the fraudulent check event update, when it says the internal subject of the investigation has been apprehended, does that mean it was a postal worker? Is that what that means?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, it was a postal inspector. Let's see, the Office of Inspector General in the post office was the one investigating this, and it appears that the theft occurred at the post office, but I don't have any details of who was apprehended. I watch the U.S. Attorney's site every week as they post new indictments that they have been brought or charges, and it hasn't appeared yet. But
Okay,
when I see something, I'll let you know if I get some details, but I haven't gotten any details of what was yet.
Okay, yeah, the phrase internal subject kind of just leaped off the page at me like, oh, it's an inside job.
It certainly looks like, yeah, it certainly looks like it was.
That's what I just assumed from the wording.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, off to item number 7, reports. 7.1, reports from the Rails president. I do not have one this month. 7.2, we'll move to committee reports. We'll start with 7.2.1, which is the advocacy committee. Jenna.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. So the Rails Advocacy Committee met on Thursday, February 11th. We had a robust meeting, as we always do, and it was filled with discussion around a variety of topics. I will do my best to be brief, even though a brief amount of time isn't going to quite capture the richness of our discussion. We continue talking first about how future ISLE meetings, so the Association of Illinois School Library Educators, can facilitate conversations regarding partnerships between school and academic libraries. So we were talking about specifically how maybe high school librarians can partner with academic librarians and facilitate students' transition from high school into the college experience. We talked more about crosswalking standards between school librarians and academic librarians, specifically those of AASL, or the American Association of School Librarians, with IACRL, or the Illinois Association of College and Research Libraries. We had a guest, Amy Walsh, who attended our meeting, and she was somebody who had presented with us at our ILA presentation back in October. And so it was great to have her feedback. She talked about the ways that high schools and local colleges could really make our action points actionable, for lack of a better term. So it was great to hear her feedback on that. And there's a little bit more information about partnership opportunities between ISLE, Rails, Heartland, and ILA. There's going to be a next group meeting coming up on March 2nd. And so we will talk more about these ideas with that group. So that is great. Our next topic was common ground around e-resources. And we were just basically talking about how libraries of all types really have that common ground of e-resources, and how Monica Harris talked with us a little bit about how Rails is working to increase the benefits that are offered through our deals and discounts program, but that we don't have a lot of school data to support how we might be able to serve schools better. And so Michael Campbell suggested that we could reach out to the Follett Corporation and see what are some ways that maybe we could partner with them, or what are some ideas that they have to gain some of that much needed data around schools. We talked about our report from the trustee roundtable, which took place on January 20th. Tom Stagg said that 170 people signed up for the meeting. And he talked a little bit about a presentation from the director at Prospect Heights Public Library about budget topics. So that was really well attended and really well done. We had a report from the ILA Trustee Forum board meeting. And So we heard a little bit more about that, and that the next ILA trustee forum board meeting will be held in March. And then we talked a little bit about the February legislative meetup discussions, and I know we'll be talking about that a little bit later in our meeting. We've got some action items that we're following up on, collaborating with current and former board members about reaching how schools and academic libraries of all types are working together, and then finding out a little bit more. Deirdre helped us find out a little bit more about Prairie Cat and how Prairie Cat is working with public libraries and school libraries in collaboration. So we've got a lot that we covered. We've got a lot more coming up, and it's just a pleasure to lead this committee, and I look forward to our steps ahead. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Jenna. This committee is really working hard, I tell you. Next up is the Consortia Committee. Paul.
Michael, the Consortia Committee has not met since our last Rails board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Next up is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Diane.
Yes. The Rails EDI Committee met on February 18th, and we had a robust discussion to help establish the experience levels of the committee members. Some committee members have been engaged with the EDI at their libraries for some time, while others are new to the topic in terms of actually working with it in their libraries. Our consultant, Biz Lindsay Ryan, facilitated our meeting, and she shifted our focus to committee training and learning and a learning plan. She discussed a training plan and learning plan with the committee that will focus on baseline learning and terminology, so we're all on the same same understanding of the terms. Also, differentiated learning and a timeline for training. The differentiated learning will be categorized into beginning, intermediate, and advanced training. The committee agreed that a Google Doc be created for committee members to add articles, book lists, TED Talks, YouTube videos, and podcasts. A list of structured learning ideas was created that included 1 hour lunch and learn trainings, multiple shorter training sessions, and role play scenarios. A list of short articles and short TED Talk videos is a way that the committee can quickly come to a learning foundation and done on their own time. A toolkit for passive learning was suggested for those whom are unable to attend training sessions. Learning content ideas discussed was an understanding of systemic racism and discrimination, an understanding on how we perceive identity, sharing of personal stories, and what it means to have privilege. The last topic discussed was the timeline for training. A session focusing on terminology was agreed as the place to start, followed by a lunch and learn training in March and April. Then our focus shifted to discussion of potential subcommittees and activities. Deirdre reported that 6 potential subcommittees were compiled from our meeting on December 2nd as important topics the committee members wanted to focus on. And those include staff training, leadership advocacy for the first, the second, recruitment, hiring, and retention as the second, the third, collection and cataloging, fourth, programs and outreach, the fifth, building and web design and accessibility, and the sixth, patron-focused policies. Rails can support up to 4 subcommittees at this time. Committee members are welcome to participate in more than one subcommittee if they so choose. Biz reviewed each of the potential subcommittees and the possible scope of our work. To determine the subcommittees in which to focus on first, members were answered a virtual poll to select their top 4 subcommittees. The results of the poll showed the top 3 as staff training, leadership, and advocacy was the first, the second being recruitment, hiring, and retention, and the third, programs and outreach. The results of the subcommittees in 4th and 5th place tied. In reviewing that result, having only 3 subcommittees was decided. To determine who will participate on each subcommittee, a survey will be emailed to members to select his or her first choice, second choice, and third choice. Each subcommittee will draft a charge, determine a leader or multiple leaders, and decide on tasks and projects. Each subcommittee will report on their progress. The meeting was adjourned, and we will be meeting again Wednesday, April 21st at 10:30 till noon, and also in June, on Tuesday, June 15th, from 1:30 till 3 p.m. And personally, I would appreciate if anyone comes upon any current articles that are of interest concerning EDI, I would appreciate you forwarding them to me. I'm learning along with everyone, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Diane. Any questions for Diane?
Michael, this is Paul. It's not a question, Diane. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but the United Way of Illinois, United Way of Illinois has actually got a 21-week equity challenge with content for every week. That's I've been going through it. They're on week 6 right now. That's really good. So I'd be happy to send along that link if you haven't seen it.
Oh, no, would you please? I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Good. Next up is the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee did not meet. Number 7.2.5 is the Policy Committee. Thomas Stagg.
Michael, we did not meet.
Okay, thank you. How about the Resource Sharing Committee?
Have not met.
Okay. And then last but not least is the Universal Service Committee and Sue.
Yes, and we did meet. So we met on February 5th and welcomed new members, including Rails board members Beth Teppen, Becky Spratford, and Jessica McIntosh. The Universal Service Committee is charged to recognize the importance of extending service to the approximate 1 million unserved residents in Illinois. Dee reminded about the benefits of the Rails Pulse page. And Mary Witt has developed talking points to help answer taxpayers' questions about why giving free library cards to kids, students is a good idea, and to justify providing additional library services to non-residents. And you can find these talking points on the Universal Service Committee page. Legislative updates were given by Greg McCormick about Cards for Kids, which means no fee for library cards to non-resident K through 12 students who fall at or below U.S. Department of Ag income eligibility guidelines. Also about e-resources card, which allows non-residents to access digital content that the closest library can provide at no cost, and the disabled veterans standard homestead exemption, where non-resident fee shall not apply to veterans with service-connected disability. Going on, talked about multiple listings, and it seems that realtors are still not really receptive about including information about unserved areas while they're selling homes. Talked about library mergers, non-contiguous boundaries, but shared non-residential boundaries need an election. And Carol Metal shared her experiences of lots of hard work trying to get this merger in her area, but still got voted down. There was lots of discussion about helping non-resident families reduce fees for cards through tax formula options. And Catherine Yanikowski from Joliet was very informative and shared what Joliet did to help the families who owned or rented in non-residential areas. Gail Bush from Oakton Community College was there to talk about the role of community colleges. And I'm going to turn this part over to Dee, if you don't mind, Dee.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there was a long discussion about community colleges. Jennifer McIntosh was there too from College of DuPage. She's on the committee now. And it was somewhat a little bit tangential to universal service, but not really, because it's about community college, you know, the possibility that they might serve as the public library, so to speak, for non-residents. And the way Gail Bush talks about it is that the what we call the unserved are not actually unserved, they're underserved because they do have access through a community college. I would say that I don't completely agree with that, because not every community college, as far as we know, really does, provide service to the public. So I don't think it solves our problem at all. But on the other hand, that's another pathway. So it was really a really great meeting.
And then Jennifer told us, this is Becky,
right,
that I was fascinated by this. Jennifer, you want to talk about it? Even though your college is very good about opening its doors, you can't offer your databases except in the building, which I did not know.
Yeah, that's absolutely, I mean, the academic licensing really limits us quite a bit in terms of how we can define our users. And those academic licenses really have that restriction to walk-in users. And that's how the public can benefit from our services. So if there's any limits on access, or if there's system logins, that barrier becomes bigger and bigger. But yeah, off-campus access being the thing that so many people want, that's a really hard limit that we're struggling with helping that population.
That's some of what Dee said. That's some of what Dee was saying too. Like it's not as the access is not as immediate as it was explained to us.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh, and
most schools and colleges have that limitation. Yeah.
Although interestingly, my college gives alumni full access to all their databases. So I don't know how they worked that out, but
different
Well,
licensing
it's
for
all-
that. Usually.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all a question of money. I mean, public libraries face the same thing. When we approach a database vendor and we say, hey, we would like access to your database, they say, is it only for inside your buildings or is it remote? And as soon as you say remote, then the price goes way up because they're increasing their exposure to usage of their product. And, so money solves all problems as usual.
Okay. Anything else about Universal Service Committee?
No, not for
I
me.
received I received email from Anna this morning, and it looks like we're gonna meet again in May. To the doodle poll, we just have to kind of narrow in on a date, so. That's it, thank you.
No, thank you, Sue. Sounds like you're doing a lot of good work. Okay, next up is Dee with the Rails report.
Yeah, so you've already heard from these committee reports it's been a very busy month, I think very productive month. Board's been working hard, members been working hard, staff been working hard. So just a few highlights from my report, because several of the items in it are actually agenda items. I did want to just update you a little bit on the quarantine change. As you know, we changed to 24 hours. Heartland is at 48. Just this past Monday, I got a copy of a survey that was done of the Urban Library Council libraries, which is, I don't know, a bunch of maybe 100. Would you think, Monica?
Maybe slightly more than that, but yeah.
Kind of big libraries across the country. They're not all huge, but I mean, Chicago's in there, but so is Skokie, for example. But a very interesting survey. It completely all over the place. I mean, you have some doing 96 hours, you have some doing 24. Some wanting to go to 24. Some not having, it was very interesting. I sent it to Paul. I can send it to the rest of you if you want. really, everybody's still struggling with this. So it's not kind of just us here. Not that I thought it was, but still it was. I'll send that along. Let's see. So yeah, we're really busy. We've got the data post page up on our website, thanks to Grant and the communications team. Monica and I are continuing to go to the networking meetings. There's a big long list in the Rails monthly report. Learning a lot of great things there. We've been to a bunch of the legislative meetups as well, and heard really great support from legislators, great reports from ILA as well. Certification is ongoing. We got a bunch of great proposals for the My Library Is grant. So we're focusing on school libraries and partnerships, which I think is, very apropos of our, desire to help school libraries and advocate for them. So I think that's about all I got. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Okay, on to our EDI activities. We'll get the Rails Service of the Month report, which is an update of the Rails EDI initiative with Monica Harris and Joe Philippa.
Thank you, Michael. And I think Joe's going to start us off, if that's okay. Can you hear me, Joe?
I can. Thank you, Monica. And it's nice to be with all of you. So yeah, Monica and I are just going to share a little bit about our EDI initiative to date. While I think staff are, eager to get to work on doing all the things, there is a process that's been laid out by our consultant, Elizabeth Lindsay Ryan Biz, that we're committed to following. So rest assured, this will probably be the first of what will be several future updates that we'll be sharing with the board on the various impacts and outcomes of this work. We did include a short document in your board packet that provides a summation of some of these things. I'll start by talking about the Rails Climate Team. This is a team of 10 staff members who began meeting on a monthly basis in September. We took volunteers from staff for this committee, and I think I can speak for us all in saying that we're really pleased on how representative a group this came out to be. I don't think we had to forcibly put anyone on this team, maybe one, but that's pretty good. We have staff from just about all of our departments, including staff from RSA and delivery. So very representative group. The role of this team is really just is to work with Biz and provide insight and to engage in dialogue into the culture and climate of Rails, so that we can move towards implementing some actionable steps towards making Rails, the goal of making Rails a more equitable and inclusive organization. Our first phase in this process is something of an inventory phase. We identified 4 core relationships that we think are critical to examine through an EDI lens. Those relationships are Rails staff to our members, of course, Rails staff to one another, Rails to our various partner organizations, our vendors, associations like ALA and ILA and IL, all those various collaborators that we have. And then Rails staff to all of you as the board. And so those are kind of the 4 key relationships that we are exploring. So over the last 6 months, we've taken something of a deep dive into these relationships in a couple different ways. One of the activities that Biz has been leading the team through is what she refers to as a stop, start, continue activity, which has been done in different ways, but basically looking at within each of these 4 core relationships, what are the things that we're doing right now that's working that we want to continue? What maybe are things we are not doing that we want to start doing? And of course, what are things that maybe we need to stop doing? And I gave some examples in the document in your board packet of some of the things that we look at in this regard. And The other sort of resource that's is part of this team that the team is using is a toolkit that is prepared with feedback from staff that sort of looks at these 4 core relationships. And in addition to giving us some sort of foundational information, has a lot of different kind of probing questions around each of these 4 relationships that we talk through during the course of climate team after we've done this stop, start, continue activity. So questions like, what do we think our members want from Rails in the area of EDI? What sort of internal policies within Rails do we have or should have that fosters inclusivity and respect the identities of our staff? How does the Rails board reflect the diversity of our membership? So that's been a big part of our conversations as well, as going through these questions for each of the 4 relationship types. We've pretty much completed this initial inventory phase, and we'll now be moving into the planning phase, which will be really getting into kind of the action items, the things that we'll want to implement moving forward, making some changes, and again, for that ultimate aim of making Rails a more inclusive, equitable place. Beyond just the climate team, of course, part of this initiative on the internal side of things is to support all of our staff in their understanding of EDI concepts and instilling those principles into the culture of Rails. So to that end, we are also having Biz provide training, of course, to all Rails staff. In the fall, we had a mandatory training. It was a half-day session that focused on EDI concepts, very much introductory. Presentation, small group activity, etc. Next week, and again in April, we'll be doing our next half-day mandatory training that will focus on the concept of gender, socialization, norms, conflicts, etc. Before I turn things over to Monica to say just a few words about the EDI board committee, I'll end in saying that while we've been in this kind of initial phase of inventory and mostly exploratory and sort of introspective work, we can point to at least a few tangible outcomes, I think, to this point. The survey that I believe all of you received as board members was at least in part motivated and crafted in part based on conversations that we had during the climate team on that board staff relationship and what we thought was important for the board. And I know that some of that was, Dee is obviously part of the climate team, and I know that was helpful for her in working with Mary to put that survey together. Mary Witt recently shared with me that the application that we're using now for prospective board members, we made some changes to that, again, based on some of the feedback in our conversations with Biz during climate team that she then relayed to Dee and to Mary and so forth. And then also, finally, we received some feedback from staff a few months ago around the sharing of personal pronouns in the workplace, which I know happens in a lot of places, but isn't a conversation that we had. So we talked about this in executive team and during climate team. And so part of the reason that we're going to be doing training around gender upcoming was that it would allow us to kind of explore this for the whole staff and see what intentional actions we might be able to take around that concept. So those are just a few things that I think have been outcomes of our climate team work and training so far. So that's what I wanted to say. Monica, I'll pass it over to you to say a few words about the EDI board committee.
Thank you, Joe. Well, and we were delighted to be able to hear from Chair Diane Hollister, who shared a lot about the last board meeting. I know that you saw in the little insert that was in your packet the makeup of the board committee, of the Rails EDI board committee, and it is a wonderfully engaged and large group. And so one of the really exciting things about this committee is not just diversity in many different aspects, including role. There's a lot of folks who are here who are working, some in part-time roles or in entry-level library or library worker roles, which has been unusual for a Rails board committee. And so it's exciting to see how that's happening as well, and the work that they're going to be doing. So as Diane mentioned, they did talk about priorities, specifically priorities for the subcommittees that'll be doing a lot of the work that's coming through. And again, those focuses of staff training, leadership, and advocacy, recruitment, hiring, and retention, and programs and outreach have been established as priorities for that group. And that group is going to be working at aligning with which subcommittees they'll work in, and then doing the hard work of prioritization. I think one of the big things that came through in terms of this board committee is that EDI is such a huge concept, and there are so many things included in concepts of EDI in libraries. And where do you start? How do you focus? And how do you do the work? So this group really understands a lot of that. And they're also very committed to learning, having a shared vocabulary, as Diane said, and really making sure that they know how to communicate with each other as they look outward towards how Rails can work with members and work with communities to continue to focus on these important issues that are related to their charge. One other piece we wanted to be able to note and share from the committee is that they were able to look at the ILA survey that was done last fall, which was another really valuable place in Illinois that is focused on EDI work, and it allows us to share information with that group and also to make sure that we're learning from each other. And so as we continue to work towards our goals, we'll continue to share with other groups that are doing this important work and make sure that we are amplifying and working together to make sure that the work continues in the biggest and broadest way possible. We also wanted to call your attention, in addition to the great work that's happening with this board committee, to there's another place to look at Rails when you look at the Pulse page that's available in terms of other EDI initiatives, information, things that are shared with us that we are continuing to share and update. So we want to encourage everybody to continue to look there as we're moving forward. And note that this work is, of course, huge, but we are excited about the enthusiasm that's happening both from in-staff and from the board and from the board committee in terms of all of the work that is going to continue to move forward. Are there any questions about anything Joe mentioned or I mentioned?
I think just to reiterate, I mean, it's probably obvious, but the reason we're doing this, pretty much all of this work is to make Rails a better place, but also so we can help our members, deal with these issues. So that's, it's all about member service.
Absolutely.
They have asked for it.
And I think members this is Becky, are paying attention, because I mentioned this in the meeting. Like, as soon as people heard we had our first meeting, I was getting people reach out to me. What have you done? I'm like, and Monica's right. The committee understands how we have to go about this the right way, but that we also have to keep moving forward. But the members are super excited, like that we're helping in this way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now on to the state library. Greg?
Well, good afternoon and greetings to you all from Secretary White and the staff here at the State Library. I do want to point out that in one of the link rooms, you may want to note that Karen Egan and Gwen Harrison have joined this meeting. I don't know if that's obvious though, so as a matter of
Thank you.
So, some updates since our last meeting. Obviously, many of you are aware of the governor's State of the State and budget address. We were pleased to see that the secretary's budget and his request for level funding for library and literacy programs, including the increased funding for public libraries and schools, was included in that message, and we are following that very closely through the remainder of the spring and the budget process. Also keeping a very close eye on what's happening at the federal level, because probably more so than ever, what occurs and the impact of that upon funding for local and state governments may have such a direct impact upon what the outcome is for the state's budget in the coming years, in the very early years. So we're all following that very, very closely. Earlier this week, we did send a reminder, speaking of the public library per capita grants and those increase, a reminder to public libraries that had not yet submitted their application for that funding, which has a due date of March 15th. I think it was by Tuesday, we had processed approximately a third of the anticipated applications, and we've received a number since that message went out. But just a continual reminder to get those applications into our office. We do believe that funding will be released even absent of any statutory language change, because of the way the current language will allow that distribution to occur. So that's very, very important for public libraries, and a reminder about that. April 15th will be the due date, of course, for the Public Library Construction Act grant applications. We are continuing to move a number of those forward with the public libraries that were deemed eligible earlier this year. The latest being, I'm happy to announce, the Galesburg Public Library has received their award, which is quite substantial.
Yay, that's great.
So
They'll
we're
finally get out
awaiting
of their
for-
temporary building.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
we're-
That's been there. That's great.
So we're waiting on follow-up from them. There will be more announcements about that, but of course that's a Rails library, and there are several more that are getting close to getting everything submitted to us for those awards to move forward. So that's very exciting, and of course that's from the $50 million appropriation, and we certainly would hope that we can see that funding occur again in ensuing years with an additional appropriation. We'll also be finalizing the Live and Learn construction grant applications, reviews, and get those recommendations or the funding and grant award notifications out to the applicant public libraries. Regarding the system funding, early next week, each of the library systems should receive the final draft or the final version of the FY22 system area and per capita grant application. We put the finishing touches on that, or final review. There really are no changes. So any planning you have done thus far in anticipation of that funding should simply be fine. It will be a matter of putting it, your thoughts and numbers to paper at that point. Regarding Jim's comment regarding release of funding, yes, of course, that is a continued issue with payment delays. I would note, though, that we expect the federal funding for each of the library systems, which is about it's over $1.9 million for Rails, to be in the state's clearing accounts next week. So that will be forthcoming, and you should have that within the next 14 days. So that's a substantial change to what is still owed the library system for its operations in FY21. So
great.
That's really all I have for today.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. This is Jim.
A sigh of relief there, Jim.
Any questions for Greg?
I just have to tell you, well, if you have never been to the Galesburg Library, there was a fire. Their building burned back in the 60s, and they've been in a temporary building since the 60s. Yeah. So thank God they're great. It is such a terrible building. Oh my God.
Years.
Wow.
Over 50 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they are a carryover project from the first round of applications that our office processed in 2013 and 14. And so they have continued to keep that application up to date in anticipation of future funding all of this time. So
Good for them.
It's a long
including,
time.
you know, obvious changes of leadership. So
Sure. Yes, right. Right. I mean, Harriet was on our board back then.
Wow.
Anyway,
Wow.
happy ending, I guess.
Yep. Very good. Thank you, Greg. Okay, we'll move to item number 8, new business, 8.1, the deferred expenditures in FY 2021 budget. Dee.
Sure, thank you. There is a memo in your packet, just to remind you all, and for those of you who weren't here at the time. You know, in May, I guess it was, yes, when we presented the budget, we did, even though we had been told and were, you know, filling out the area and per capita grant for a level funded budget, based on what was happening with the pandemic, state revenues plummeting, it seemed very likely that we could see cuts, even substantial cuts in our budget. And so we decided to defer some big expenditures. The board was in complete agreement and also was in complete agreement that we would come back to you when things looked different. So things look different. We did not buy any laptops this year, and we really need to, as we have certainly learned from working remotely. We got to keep that nice and robust. So that's $125,000, give or take. We also didn't buy any vehicles, but I think we'll wait at this point and, for the next fiscal year where we haven't driven them very much either. Well, I mean, the fleet vehicle, the delivery vehicles, but even them less than we would have anticipated. And we also didn't fund staff raises. So I'm here to ask that you do fund those. We've given you some background information on what's been going on in libraries, what the different scenarios might be. But I do want you to be especially aware that Heartland did implement 3% raises in July 1 of 2020. And I would certainly like to keep the Rails staff up at least with where the Heartland Library staff is. Thank you.
Any discussion on the 3% increase and the purchase of the laptop?
Michael, this is Paul Mills. I would actually like to motion that we proceed with 3% increases for staff and also purchase the staff laptops, just to get the ball rolling, just so we can start that conversation. I do have a couple of things I'd like to say, but I wanted to get that motion on the floor.
So this is Becky, second.
Okay. So Emily, will you please call roll?
Oh, no, we want to discuss.
Oh, we want to have a discussion. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, again, Paul, I just wanted to say, which I think is a fairly universal statement, our staff at Rails have done a fantastic job this past year. And I also want to make sure this does include our executive director and her compensation as well, because her compensation was deferred, increase was, deferred as everyone else's was. And, certainly laptops are probably the most key tool any of us have. The only other thing I'd say, and just this truly is an operational decision. I'll just comment though that since I have a particular interest in vehicles, that I really do think if Rail staff thinks it's appropriate to purchase new vehicles, that they should purchase new vehicles. They work with them. These are key things. So I just wanted to voice my support that if Rail staff thinks it's appropriate to buy new vehicles, I think they should.
I think Mark is out there somewhere, and I'm sure he's very happy to hear you say that, Paul. So
this is Scott. I would just tag on to what Paul was just saying. I can't remember. It's all a blur, but I don't remember when Rails delivery resumed, but it's been a long time now in pandemic time.
June.
Right. So it's, you can't really say like the vehicles haven't been used because of the pandemic, because they have. So it's.
You're right.
Yeah.
Not as much, but pretty close to as much.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to Paul's other point about our executive director, I know whenever we've had that discussion in the past, there is that hard ceiling that we crash into. So would that need to be like a bonus instead of a pay increase? I'm just asking a question. I don't know.
No, it was because the secretary's salary went up, and so that.
Oh, his went up. Okay.
Yeah.
He or she.
The only thing that we need to clarify is when you would like this to take effect. I would like it to be retroactive to last July 1st. But there are other scenarios that are presented. I mean, obviously there's a difference in cost, depending on when you make it, but that is my request of you.
This is Becky. I was not on the board when you guys made the decision, and I asked for some clarification from Dee on what happened. And I was actually surprised we did not give the staff their 3% increase at the start of the budget year, because at my library, we were adamant that our staff needed to be paid because they were working extra hard through pandemic. So I am 100% for making it retroactive. And honestly, I'm feel very strongly that way. I'm just going to leave it with that.
If we make it to July 1st, then my question is, what is the budget
implication?
Yeah.
The budget the budget impact, you mean?
Yeah.
It's in the memo here. I think $128,000 retroactive to July 1st, 2020.
But was there a 3% increase budgeted for, but just not implemented?
Yes.
Yes.
So it was already budgeted for.
Oh, yeah, we
did-
have plenty of money.
No, we did
Oh,
not.
sorry,
budget-
Jim.
We did not budget the increase. But through July, we're already, I think it was over 700,000 favorable
Yeah,
under
under
budget.
budget.
So we
Yeah,
have
we're
room to
We have
absorb
the
this.
money. Yeah.
Yeah, we have
Right.
room to absorb
Sorry.
this.
I always get confused about, yeah.
Okay.
So there's
This is-
plenty of money.
This is Jennifer. I really appreciate the board's conservative way of approaching the problem when they were concerned. But I think now we know we have a better picture of the situation. We need to fully fund this retroactively. I feel very strongly about that.
This is Paul. I would happily take a friendly amendment to my motion to make it retroactive.
And I will second that amendment to keep it standard, Becky.
I think
So
we're all pretty agreed on that then, about retroactiveness, right? So I just want to make sure that no one has, okay.
Okay. So Sarah, are you the one who's making the amendment to that?
No, Paul did that.
Or
That was
are
not
you- Okay.
I think it
I
was
have the
Jennifer.
amendments. I suggested it.
thank you.
I don't know if I made it formal or not.
There, we're good. We did it.
Okay, so is there any more discussion? Okay, seeing none, Emily, will you please call roll?
Sure. Hallie Cox,
Yes.
Diane Hollister,
Yeah, yeah.
Chris Kenny,
Yes.
Sarah McCone Chase,
Yes.
Jennifer McIntosh,
Yes.
Paul Mills,
Yes.
Shannon McLuisi,
Yes.
Scott Poynton,
Yes.
Becky Spratford,
Yes.
Thomas Stagg,
Yes.
Beth Tiffin,
Yes.
Alex Vancina,
Yes.
Sue Busenbark,
Yes.
and Michael Campbell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now on to 8.2 regarding the statewide databases. Deidre, Monica, and Layla.
Yes. So as in my brief memo, I said back in 2019, we put together a proposal. This is at the same time that the per capita grant increase was proposed and forwarded and, put in the secretary's budget. This was not put in the secretary's budget, and so we waited until this year. This year, 2000, I don't even know what year I'm in, 2020, I guess it was actually, that ILA decided not to ask for any additional money. So it wasn't that they didn't think it was a good idea. They just decided, given the status with the pandemic, to not ask for money. I think a lot of you know that I think we should always ask for money, because if we don't ask for money, we won't get any money, and all they can do is say no. So this came up a lot at the Universal Service Committee. It was a big topic of conversation because statewide databases, this would be additional funding, new funding for a statewide database purchase of a suite of databases to be decided by a committee of Illinois libraries. This would be statewide. And it would also be available to unserved residents. So it would be fabulous for them. It's fabulous for all types of libraries. It's fabulous for libraries who can't afford any databases, because they'll actually get some. It's fabulous for libraries who can afford databases, because they can stop paying for some of them.
Mhm.
We are one of 2 states in the country that doesn't do this, which is ridiculous and terrible that we don't do this, in my opinion.
Dear, what's the other one? Just out of curiosity.
Colorado,
Yeah, it's surprising.
who would know,
Yeah, they have good libraries too.
Layla and Monica can tell you, Layla did a lot of great additional research. We need to kind of update our information a bit, but the most, remarkable statistic, that piece of information that she told me recently was, I'll probably get some of it wrong, but in Ohio, they spend, what, $7 million or $5 million?
7 million total. Their state database package is more like 3.
Okay. And it saves libraries $57 million a year. Not forever, but just in a year, it saves libraries $57 million. There's no downside to this. So since ILA chose to not do it, we've decided that we need to put this forward. And there's a resolution in here that, Michael suggested. I think it's a great idea to, that it shows the board support. You could encourage other library boards to, to also adopt the resolution. Becky has already reached out to her legislators, a couple of them. Also, Carol Metal, as she told us at the Universal Service Committee, she's 150% behind this. She's going to reach out to her. In fact, maybe she already has her legislators. So I guess I'm asking you to, pass a resolution and to just be helpful if we need more constituent support, because I think that's where this is. If we can get, some good grassroots support going. The consortia are very also thrilled about this idea, obviously, because it would help all their libraries.
So this is Scott. I'll make a motion that we approve this resolution.
This is Becky. I'll second it. And I want to say, it's an easy thing to pass on this information. Like Dee said, I contacted some legislators, and I'm going to do a few more. And I did it through my LaGrange Library, email, right, to contact the people. It is one of those things that when they hear how easy it would be to do, it needs to be an ongoing funding thing. This is not a one-time thing. So you can't just get, an appropriation thrown in like, some of us sometimes get from our local reps. This is a more official, ongoing funding item. But it's not hard to bring it up. And the more we can get the other libraries around us to contact, I'm going to reach out to a few other libraries who, and I know Dee's one, we share one rep, and we're going to reach out so we get multiple libraries contacting. And the key thing here is twofold. One, we just had a bunch of legislative meetups. So contacting them, they're going to be primed to see our contacts, right? Because we just all were there. And and I forgot number 2. There was something else that was really good. My brain went off. Oh, the funding. It's time to do this, right? They're going to start really talking about, now that they've closed out the one budget, they're going to start talking about the next one. So we want to be on the radar when the talks start. And this amount of money, about $5 million, is not going to break the bank in any way.
And the other thing that, they said at the legislative meetups was ask for the money.
Yeah, they straight up were saying it.
And this is what Dee and I were talking about. As I said, if we as a group pass this resolution, it shows our commitment to this as an organization. And as a consortium, it shows that we're committed to this and we think this is important and that our members should think this is important. So,
I would just add that, if there's 2 things we learned in the last 12 months, it's that, virtual or remote services are hugely important. And the spectrum of Illinoisans' ability to access those is very full of inequity. So,
yes.
Yeah. So
exactly true.
This would.
That's the kind of thing we want to update our, our proposal to include stuff like that, because it's even more clear now than it was before.
Yeah, that's a good point too. When you reach out to libraries near you to maybe, coordinate sending to the same rep, remind them that, if we get this, you can cancel your, databases. This would be statewide. It's to remind people that savings factor.
Right.
To get them to do it, to get them to make that step and ask for the money, because every single library will benefit either by getting service they don't have or by saving money on services they're already paying for.
Right.
I'll just add one additional benefit for us as a multi-type group is having consistency in resources across multi-types promotes all sorts of conversations and abilities to coordinate on marketing and outreach and consistency. And I think it really, if we need any kind of reinforcement for our leaders to support this, this is just nothing but good press for our state. Look what the state is doing for you. It's something very real and concrete. And I don't think that people feel that direct connection many times. And this is such a good example of that. So I used to live in Wyoming, where they have a really, really large suite of resources for all residents. And it's amazing how there's just this shared identity of, oh, everyone in the state has this and everyone has that. And it was just so easy to brand and talk about. I loved that. Really weird place to not have that kind of connection usually, but around library resources, yes.
Yeah, very good points. Thank you, Jennifer.
Jenna had her hand up.
Okay.
I would like to add to the conversation as well. I especially appreciated in the memo that Deirdre included in the board packet, the importance of this particular resolution and its impact to schools, especially K through 12 schools, who have been struggling, as all libraries have, but specifically school libraries have been struggling during the pandemic. And one way that I would phrase this, and I will be reaching out to my legislators to discuss this for certain, is that this is not a request for something that is nice to have. This is something that is a request. It's essential. These are essential services. This is something that our students who, there's so much concern about our students who are falling behind. When we have access to these, when all school libraries can make these available to their students, we are going to put our students in a better position to be successful both now and in the future. And so I am very much in favor of this. I think that this is something that's going to also facilitate our work on the board advocacy committee that we were talking about, with facilitating connections between our high school libraries and our academic libraries. So this is something, again, that common ground that we're building. So it's absolutely vital. And I just want to say how tremendously impactful this will be for school libraries. And I'm extremely in favor of this. So please, let's move it forward for sure.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, Emily, would you call roll?
Sure. Chris Kenny.
Yes, 100% yes.
Sarah McCone Chase.
Yes.
Jennifer McIntosh.
Yes, please.
Paul Mills.
Yes.
Jenna Namek-Luisi.
Absolutely yes.
Scott Poynton.
1000% yes.
Becky Spradford.
Yes.
Thomas Stagg.
You're all punched.
Beth Tippin.
It's been a long week.
Alex Mancina.
Yes.
Sue Busenbark.
Yes.
Ellie Cox.
Big yes.
Diane Hollister.
Affirmative.
Michael Campbell.
Yes.
Also.
Okay.
It's nice to have nice things to vote for, you know?
Okay, on to item number 8.3, Lsap support. We've seen the memos and emails from Dee and Ann, and so I'll turn it over to them for that discussion.
Yeah, so we just decided, since this has come up as a question from as we reported, as Paul, I think, reported last month from the SWAN board, realized that, you know, if you get questions from members, it would be good if you understood how this works. Now, we could spend a day talking about this, but we will not. And I'm not exaggerating. But just like a brief overview. So we spend about $2.25 million a year supporting the LSAPs, which are consortia, but LSAPs is the official term. It's in the administrative rules of the law. Local library automation program, local library system automation program. That's annual support to their operations, about 2.25. This has been going on for decades because these LSAPs originally started as a service of systems that existed at the time. And sometimes, for a while they were 18, then there were 12, then there were 9, then there were 3, I guess, like there are now. So as you can probably imagine, there was wildly divergent funding levels and structures. That, it made sense at the time. It was, for example, the Metropolitan Library System, which lived here, had very different membership than I don't know, what's a good predecessor of Alliance to say Paul or Scott, like River Bend or Heritage Trails or, very different membership makeup. A lot more small libraries. They recruited a lot of school libraries. Around here, it's mostly public libraries. Anyway, so when it all ended up at Rails, the funding was very different and very not objective. So over the years, we created this formula, which is what you received in your email, not in the packet, that shows what the different metrics are. And they're very much based on Rails values: resource sharing and building resource sharing, equity, that somehow we have to help smaller, less well-funded libraries, whatever type they are. And because otherwise we lose them, and we want everybody. That's the multi-type and is in the DNA in Illinois. And also being good stewards of our tax dollars to be sure that the distribution of money is appropriate. Because the other thing to remember is that while there are 383 members libraries of LSAPs, there are 706 libraries that are not in LSAPs. And so, like your library, Michael, is not in an LSAP. One of your libraries is not in an LSAP. So you don't benefit from that $2.25 million. So we still have to support those other libraries as well. In addition, in the chart you got in your packet, shows you the funding. It's a landscape thing, and it's Lsap support allocations FY18 to 2022. The final column in that says catalog membership grants made to new members. This is a completely separate. This is not added into or part of the 2.25 million. This is extra money that we have used very happily to fund additional membership in LSAPs. For example, Indian Trails recently joined CCS. We paid for some of that. We pay for the sort of like general cost. The library still has to pay for its, some of its servers, and Anne can talk about this. She's out there. But we pay for the migration costs because we want to encourage resource sharing. So you can see that a lot of money has gone to not everybody, because not everybody has added libraries. And the way the formula works is that when you add libraries, you increase number of members, and there's some benefit to having more members. It's part of the formula. There's also a big benefit to having more resource sharing transactions. And so as you grow, you get more money on an annual basis as well. So it's not perfect, this formula. And we had some back and forth with Swan because we changed, we're always evolving it. For example, a couple of years ago, it wasn't a per capita based formula. So that really kind of, you have to, in order to look at the, apples and apples, you got to use per capita. You can't use gross numbers. So that was one of the changes that we made. And And we haven't increased the pot, really, because it's already a lot of money, and we have all these other libraries that we're responsible to as well. But it's, you know, it's a source of stress sometimes because it's money. And so I wanted to try to give you some insight into this. You know, Ann's there. Paul is very familiar with this as the chair of the Consortia Committee. I mean, Scott's certainly familiar as a director in Pinnacle, which is a recent addition to the Lsap fold. You know, we like it best when the LSAPs don't use our funding for operations, frankly, because the whole, you know, one of the reasons that we started with the formula and have really urged all of the LSAPs to become financially independent and self-sustaining was when during the 2 years that we only got 67% of our budget. And we were very, very, very worried, and I never really stopped worrying, that our funding won't be around to sustain these organizations. And these organizations are the heart and the guts of libraries that are for their members. They cannot function without them. So we're happy to answer questions. Like I say, we could go on and on. Paul may want to add some things. Anne may want to clarify some of the things that I said, because I usually make errors, or maybe you've heard enough about the LSAPs. I don't know. What do you think, Paul? Do you want to say anything as the chair of the, how did I do?
You were great. Deirdre hit the highlights. I've been involved with regional library systems, and specifically with Consortia since 2000. And it actually would have happened in 1993 if I'd answered a phone call differently and had accepted a part-time job at Heritage Trail. No, Burr Oak. Go back. That shows how old I am. They are so crucial to libraries that are members, and they do, facilitate resource sharing in such crucial ways throughout our state. And from a personal experience, Scott and I can tell you that Pinnacle was formed because of a strong concern about the stability of funding for the LSAPs. It was one of the impetuses that led Pinnacle to be formed. And our structure has been to be financially independent from state funding. We did become an LSAP several years ago, but we do not use that funding for our ongoing operations. So that funding disappeared tomorrow because of something happens with the state's budget, it does not impact our operations. It is very helpful for Pinnacle. It has helped fund one-time capital projects and things of that nature that has been very helpful as we look at different services for the communities that we serve. But if it went away, Pinnacle does not go away, and Pinnacle does not curtail services. And that's, you've got a spectrum in the consortia that Rails supports, that, there many are very close to independent, actually are independent. And if that funding went away, they would be fine. There's others, there's other consortia that, this could lead to a contraction of the memberships that they have, which is, something we don't want to see. And we'd like all those consortia to be in a place where they can, robustly serve their communities, regardless of the vagaries of state funding.
Anne, do you want to add or correct anything that I said?
I'll hop in for a minute. Yeah, when we were talking about this, about having this discussion with you all, I kind of joked that, you hear a lot from me during the orientation that we do in July every year, but that is just like, it's barely scratching the surface. So there are a lot of points that kind of entry points for like a deep dive. So this is one of them, and we probably could talk about it all day, but if there's something that's not clear, or some historical piece that you would like to have illuminated, there's probably a lot more we could tell you. So I'm available to answer questions anytime if something occurs to you after this meeting. But I will add to Dee's points about that final column in the document in your packet regarding the catalog membership grants. That number is, just so you know, it's cumulative. We started those grants in fiscal 15. So that's a total of, pointing that out, it's in the heading, but just wanted to make sure that was clear. And those grants cover the one-time expenses of the project. So the library has to commit to paying their ongoing annual expenses.
Right. And how many libraries have we added, would you say? Just ballparky?
Ballpark, about 60. There are too many numbers like this for me to have consistently in my head at all times. So I go back and look, but it's neighborhood of 60.
Which is a lot.
Yes.
So anyway, I mean, we feel really good about this. We know it's not perfect. We're happy to, revisit, we do revisit it every year to try to make it better or more understandable. But, basically there's so much variation that you can't just divide it up by the number of libraries. It would make no sense. So.
This is Becky. I appreciate being new to this board, but not new to LSAPs, and being from Swan. So hearing from all the people who wanted to say things to me once I got on this board, I feel like I think what Dee just did before everyone else was really helpful. I think that really took the issue and boiled it down, talking about, how the funding was all over the place and how we have to consolidate it and make it most fair. And then it's just a communications issue, right? Because some people will be super excited and some people will be upset. But the key, the message we have to keep giving is that we're trying to make it more fair for everyone. And I think we just need to, I think some of the issues with Swan came up because of communication issues that may or may not have been, it was not Rail's fault, may or may not have been specific people who were at meetings on Swan's side fault, but it was the pandemic that really caused this sort of break. By the time the information got out, it was too late for people to react. And so we just have to, I think, just keep having these sort of open conversations in a way like Dee did, that's very easy to understand, doesn't call anybody out, and just talks about making it more fair. I love that number of libraries that aren't in an LSAP. Like, I always have been in an LSAP, so I never thought about it.
It's a big number.
That alone is enough for people to sort of be like, check yourself. It's not just about you. This is, and I get it. Like, it's emotional. As I wrote down what Dee said about that the LSAPs are the heart and the guts of the library. I think that's why we're seeing such reaction. And so we should just commit as a board, whoever's on the board, to just having the LSAP conversation clearly and loudly, even though I think we did, hopefully without a pandemic to hide it. And I think we'll be okay going forward. And these fixes are going to help in the long run so that message does stay consistent.
There's also a lot of unautomated libraries.
Yeah, that I knew that. Yeah, that's true.
And, forgive me, because I come from the trustee side here. The advantages, and like Dee said, my library is not a participating library. And, what is, why do we have the number of LSAPs that we do? One of my questions to Dee, that when she sent this out, is what's the difference between one and the other? What are the, do we have consistency between the different LSAPs? What, why, all these different questions here, so, that was one of the questions that I had.
It's a great question.
It is a good question.
Is there some opportunity to consolidate? Is there opportunity to consistently, pay, give the funding based on that?
We have consolidated, of course. Nick joined, if you don't mind, the Prairie Cat, a bunch of acronyms, some libraries that had broken off of Prairie Cat up and around Woodstock and near Rockford, they rejoined Prairie Cat. Swan added 19 libraries that had been part of Link and Magic. So those two, so we lost 3 LSAPs right there. But I would say the main reason that there's variety, if you want to call it, or inconsistency, is because most of the fees is paid by the members. So they decide what they want,
So each of them have different fees.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Based on how much it costs each consortium to do its job, each catalog consortium.
And then they have to, like, every year we have to vote, there's somebody, we get a report from like the SWAN Consortia Committee, and we hear about things that are being added, how much it's going to cost, and we have to vote as a board about that. I mean, they talk about it all the time.
I think, I don't know the number, Deirdre or somebody on the rail staff might want to jump in here, but if you think about, obviously Rails moves materials, we move materials between the libraries. But if you go one step back from that, well, why are they being moved between the libraries? Because there are these catalog consortia that are allowing people convenient and easy ways to request materials from other libraries. So I know that there are some materials that move from one sort of Lsap to another. That does happen, but it's nothing compared to the amount that moves within consortia. I mean, I got to think it's 95% of the materials that Rails is moving are moving within a consortia, I would think.
We can look, we're actually running so many stats right now for the RFP, which I know that's later. And so we could analyze some of that information and share it with you later. I just hate to share something with you that's not totally accurate, but those are numbers that we're certainly looking at.
Right. And again, as I preface that, I'm making that number up. But that's what my gut tells me. Just looking at the amount of materials that my library gets from outside of Pinnacle versus within Pinnacle, it's a drop in the bucket compared to.
Right, but for all those libraries that aren't in LSAPs, for Skokie, Naperville, Arlington Heights, those are the numbers that we would have to look at too.
For sure. But so in a way, this is all a lead up to me saying, in a way, the reason why resource sharing works the way it does in Illinois is because of the Lsaps. Like the trucks are great to move materials around, but without the Lsaps, that all collapses. So that's kind of
the Lsaps do encourage it. I think what I'm trying to say, they encourage more sharing easily, which helps everybody to share more easily as a result. Yes. Exactly. So funding them makes sense, right? Okay.
Then my question is, then we have these 700 libraries that are not in. Exactly. Then then there's an issue for those libraries that are not involved in it.
And some of them just don't want to be. Some of them can't afford it.
Right.
But I will tell you, there's some really big ones I know that are not in them who have new directors and are talking about it, like in ways that I have not heard ever, because they see the benefits, especially since the pandemic.
Well, that would be great.
The library says Rails is about cooperation, library cooperation. That's going to come in lots of different shapes and sizes. I think we have to kind of embrace the diversity of how libraries organize. I think that is kind of at the heart of it. These groups have identities that they kind of build up amongst themselves. So
Very
true. Right.
Yep.
It's like little teams.
Okay.
Thank you for indulging us.
Okay, next up is item 8.4, which was an OSHA complaint, which is discussion only from Monica Harris and Mark Hatch.
We just wanted to make you aware, and I know you got a lot of the documentation in the packet. I'm not sure if you saw the follow-up.
Yeah, I sent the closure letter today.
You did, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So the original letter came to us on February 8th because there was a complaint made to OSHA about conditions at the East Peoria location specifically. And the complaint, what OSHA shared with us were exactly what the complaints were. So we and Mark and Robert worked together to work with the person who contacted us. We looked together at how to respond to that, and then you did receive the response, which also included all of the ways that we're responding to the specific complaints that came to us, along with some photographs that showed the things that had been happening and that were in place. We then received a follow-up just asking for 2 clarification points. One where we had said we strengthen regularly. They wanted to know what regularly means. Regularly means at the East Peoria location 3 to 4 times a week of the 5 days that they're delivering, at least, if not 5 days a week. That was the answer to that piece. And the other piece was that we mentioned that we were in the process of developing a self-assessment questionnaire that, in addition to all of the other safety precautions that were already in place, including the temperature checks, all of the signage that's around all of our locations, all of the staff meeting and intranet and other training that has been involved in terms of how we deal with COVID and safety, that we were developing a self-assessment questionnaire that would be posted at each door that asked 4 questions of each person coming into the door to ask them to ask these questions. And if they answered yes to any of these questions, which are things like, have you had symptoms outside of the normal range? And a lot of the same things you guys have seen when you're entering a hospital or your kids are going to school or the same places. So you should have seen that if you are entering one of our buildings today, when you came in to do your temperature check, you also saw that self-assessment check piece where we ask people to answer these questions. If they answer yes to any of them, they are not allowed to enter our building. So OSHA also asked when we were going to be able to post that and offer training for it. And we said we could do it quickly. So that's what we did in our response. So the response letter that came out on the 12th noted the frequency of the spraying of the bins, and then also the self-assessment questionnaire when it was posted and when we were able to do training. So we did some training first with the East Peoria location, since that's the one that was specific to this OSHA piece, but then we also offered training to all of our staff at our staff meeting that we just had yesterday. And then we also posted that self-assessment questionnaire on the intranet in advance of that as well. So we just wanted to make sure that you are all aware of this. The OSHA, the final letter that came from OSHA saying that they believe that the complaint has been satisfied to their satisfaction at this point. But if you have any questions about this, we're more than happy to answer them.
Great job.
Thank you. Okay, on to unfinished business, item number 9.1, which is the board engagement survey for discussion only, and D.
This is just really quick. We've got, I think we have 10, 9, 11, something, but we want 15. So if you haven't filled it out, please fill it out.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Because I thought it was great. Is that something maybe we could offer a version of that for libraries to do with their boards? Like
Sure.
someday? Like I think that would be a good thing to maybe put on the director's board or something. Because I mean, I know my library, we're getting 2 brand new board members, one because somebody moved and one because there's a turnover. And I'm gonna, I would love to pass this on to my director because we're looking for unique ways to get everybody, because our board is like, except for me, everybody's really new. And we have a new director, so this would be great. Yeah.
Let us see.
Let's see how it goes. And maybe
see in case we get any feedback on making it clearer or anything like that.
I think it would be great to share.
Sure.
Okay, item number 9.2 is the board election and nominating committee. Do you want to talk about the board, the nominating committee and the board election?
Well, it is that time of the year again. And so the terms that are up are, let's see, Michael, your term, but you can run again. And let's see, Percy's term is up, but he can run again. Sarah's term is up, she can run again. Paul Mills's term is up, and sadly, he cannot run again. So I'm sad. Rails is sad.
Oh, it's sad.
And Tom Stagg's term is up, and he can run again. So what we do is we form a nominating committee, and Michael and I had a fascinating conversation about the nominating committee because our bylaws are very vague. It just says the president shall appoint a nominating committee, and then what the nominating committee does. Although it does say very specifically that nobody who's on the board can be on the nominating committee, and nobody who's on the nominating committee can become a candidate for the board. That's, it's. And I mean, well, for example, let's take ILA. The past president is the chair of the nominating committee. And that has been my experience with boards, is that's how that works. But I think that when Rails was formed, there was a lot of mistrust because the board members were from different systems. And so they wanted to be sure that it was nobody on the board had any kind of vested interest in their successor. Yes.
So, I mean, what pool of people are you pulling from to staff the
members? Members or just
library people.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, but he's on that.
So it's just, so in the past, frankly, I have done it in conjunction with the president, but and so it becomes a very sort of staff nominating committee activity, which, is fine, but
Yeah.
So anyway, Kathy Parker has agreed to be the chair, which I think is great because she has a lot of institutional knowledge. She is a former board member, but she knows a lot of people. She's, but we really also are trying for more diversity this year. And I think we are achieving that with some of the other people who have agreed, including diversity of job title. It's not all directors or, but, Michael thinks that the bylaws need to be updated.
So
and I think he's probably right.
Discussion, and so at our next meeting, we will present some options for bylaw changes.
Yeah, we're gonna do some research and see what. Yeah, I think it's.
I think that's a good idea. I think the bylaws is something that makes something clearer, and I'm actually a little more confused than ever.
Yes, exactly. I was too, because all I can do is say, "Hey Dee, will you find some people?"
Yeah, that's not helpful.
Exactly. So.
I think maybe the policy committee might actually have a job.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, it doesn't even say how many people should be on the nominating committee.
No.
We could have 2 people. We could have 1 person.
We could have 20.
Yes, exactly. So it's really nebulous.
And I appreciated Michael's insight that it kind of has put me in an awkward position sometimes.
Right.
Like, well, who can do this, or who, in terms of being it's better to. I'd rather not get involved.
Did you get any feedback? We mentioned it at the EDI committee meeting.
Yeah, we got a volunteer.
Excellent.
Yep.
And that was another question that I asked.
Yeah, it was asked at the meeting, and it was very clear that we are looking for diversity.
Yep.
Exactly. And that was the other question that I had. How do we deal with those kinds of issues and stuff? So like this year, it would have been very appropriate for Paul to chair that committee.
Yeah.
And so.
As the past president.
Yeah, as the past president.
Right.
So.
Who's not running.
And so we have people who fortunately, we have people that are on the nominating committee that don't know our board, that are going to nominate our executive committee.
No, they don't actually though. Well, you're right, they do. Sorry.
Yeah.
They nominate the officers.
Right.
But the board they present the slate.
Right.
But
and then
the board can vote it or not.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good point to change them a bit.
But anyway, so that's
it's a multi-step process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you open up the bylaws, you might be really sorry.
Yeah, we're doing that at my library. It takes a while.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we're moving forward with that.
Yes.
Well, I was just going to say that it's a 15-member board and everyone's on 3-year terms. So in theory, there's 5 seats up for election each time, probably. Right. But unfortunately, not everybody has always done a second term.
Right.
So you don't always have 5 people departing the board. Otherwise, that would be the perfect committee. But sometimes it's just one that's no longer eligible to run. And it's unfair to have a committee of one with that person. Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Next up is delivery RFP with Monica and Mark.
This is just another one we wanted to make sure you're aware of. I know we have mentioned in the past that we are exploring the RFP process. Greg Pranovich, who is the consultant that we are working with, has presented to the board recently about some of the pieces of delivery all across Illinois. This is just describing, the memo that you got was just describing where we're at in the process. Mark and his team have been working really hard on getting all of the data that we need in order to make the RFP up to date and give any potential vendors all the information they would need to make a good proposal. But there is also just for your information, this is based off the same RFP that was done in 2013. It's just being updated with all of that information sharing. And then with some updated just practice that would be new to 2021 in terms of answering by form and some of those pieces. So if you have any questions at all about the RFP, we will do our best to answer them.
I'm just excited about moving forward with this. I think it'll be, especially after the presentation, because that was new to me. Was that a couple months ago? I think it'll be really helpful and save us lots of money. And I'm also excited to have an RFP that isn't about floodwaters coming into your library, because that's what I've been doing for the last 2 months. So this is great. Wow.
Okay, Thank you. So now it's on to item number 10, which is board development. And this month it's academic libraries, trends and challenges. So we're privileged to have Sarah and Jennifer this month give us our presentation.
So thank you very much for having us to talk about this. Can I be heard okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. First, I'd like to ask for your attention to go to the graphic that Jen made, just to show how academic institutions in the state are not monolithic at all. There are 206 degree granting institutions statewide, 57% of them are served by Rails. 12 public universities, 48 community colleges, 93 independent not-for-profits, 11 independent for-profits, 42 out-of-state, and 252 non-degree granting private businesses and vocational schools. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about, actually there were a couple of other stats I wanted to hit on here. I'm sorry. 608,004 total headcount enrollment statewide in degree granting institutions for the fall of 2020. 77% of those were undergraduate, 27 then being graduate. 1% is enrolled in at least one remedial class, and 80% are enrolled at a community college. I want to talk a little bit about Carly. So the Carly iShare Consortium has 129 members in the state of Illinois. It covers the state. It includes academic and research libraries of many different types, from the U of I system to major state universities to community colleges to small research libraries, absolutely everything in between. And the vast majority of those institutions are at the membership level, that's what we call governing. And as such, those members are eligible to participate in a variety of benefits, including participating in the iShare consortial borrowing, participating in ILDS, and lending and consortial buying of research databases. And it can't be overestimated how important these benefits are to us. Carly is a very strong consortium, and users really reap these advantages. They have access to the collections of all the other iShare libraries. And we have a centralized systems management and resource sharing. It makes us a much stronger consortium. We have cost savings built in. We work together in this consortium. The work that we've done in this consortium together this past year, for example, has really helped us weather the pandemic where we might have struggled more otherwise. Belonging to Carly also means we have a common ILS system, and that's why we had this huge migration to Alma over the summer. These systems definitely impact institutions in various ways, and they disproportionately impact smaller institutions with less tech support. It's been the migration to the new system has been a huge learning curve for many of us, and that learning curve is also disproportionately on the smaller institutions. Also being part of Carly also means that we can't operate as more independent institutions with distinctive collections. Carly often defines policies across the consortium, and that sometimes forces institutional policy changes that would not have been chosen otherwise. In addition, brokered purchases are chosen based on what's best for the majority of the consortium, and that means that the interests and the needs of small institutions are sometimes not addressed. I also wanted to hit on collections here, even though that didn't make it onto the handout. When Jen and I were talking about this the other day, we realized that we all, as academic institutions, just approach our collections differently. And of course, a collections concern is sort of an underpinning of all of our discussions. We wanted to mention it here because we share collections within Carly. But other than that, we also have different concerns when it comes to collections. Our collections are meant to reflect and support the curriculum, and this accounts for our radically different approaches to the collection. So, for example, some libraries focus on the collection, on being a collection of record, like large or academic institutions that prioritize research. And then others focus on supporting the current curriculum to target what will be needed for class. And Jen talked about this being a learning versus research continuum, which I think is a really nice way to think about the issue. I'm going to talk a little bit right now about that migration that I was just mentioning to Alma. The iShare libraries that are part of Carly went live with this major migration to Alma at the end of June 2020. That might sound like really strange timing, but it's actually not, because we had been preparing for this migration for a number of years. The pandemic did not push back the go live date because we were already really close to that go live date, and a lot of that major work had already been completed or would be completed without library workers necessarily being in the library. Despite the fact that the migrations already occurred, many of these smaller details are still being decided upon at individual libraries, like how are we going to do this, how are we going to do this? And we're still educating ourselves on the whole system as a consortium. ALMA is extremely complex, a dizzying array of constraints and freedoms that we had not experienced before. Suffice it to say, ALMA has taken up a disproportionate, I'm using that word a lot, I'm sorry. ALMA has taken up a disproportionate amount of time in 2020, and it promises to take up a lot of time in 2021 as well. I'm going to hand it over to Jen for a bit.
Right. So I just want to kind of say I think it was so fruitful for Sarah and I to work on this project together, because I think we learned a lot about the diversity of academic libraries just through discussion. And I thought it was just a very productive process of trying to distill our ideas. She talked a little bit about technology through the lens of the migration and what a major issue that is. But of course, technology is, we thought it worth kind of just talking about technology a little bit more, but really focusing in, there's so many things we could talk about, right? Everything from digital scholarship to, augmented and virtual reality technology. And there's all sorts of things we could talk about with technology, but we thought, I thought focusing on accessibility would be a really interesting thing to share with you. In 2017, the New Media Consortium's Horizon Report for libraries, they identified accessibility of library service and resources as a solvable challenge, meaning something that we understand and we know how to solve. But I think even the fact that it is something that is solvable and understandable, it's not well implemented, and it's certainly not uniformly understood how to best handle that challenge. So there's still a lot of work to be done in that area. And we have a lot of great tools and resources, and we're constantly thinking about how to make our collections more accessible and understood and user friendly. But everything is constantly changing. So it's this really ongoing area for discussion. And we have to really, whenever we can, try to think with a universal design mindset, because there's just so many needs, right? And so we're thinking about this not just in terms of technology, but spaces and other things as well. Creates a lot of need for training among our staff to be able to work with users and understanding these principles and how to build them into the way we work with each other and the kinds of recommendations we make. There's legal mandates around this in higher education that really sometimes drive the conversation before we really fully understand the implications of it. Things like the need to caption all audiovisual materials for students. Anything they need to access through class has to be captioned. That's mandated. And then as we look at resources that we bring on, we have to perform some audits of those resources and make sure that they're accessible and can be translated into different formats for different kinds of users. Among different kinds of academic libraries, it's more common now to see recording equipment being checked out to assist individual users, magnification and text-to-speech equipment that can help users with not just electronic, but also physical print materials in this space. So, it goes in so many different directions. We're using usability testing, feedback from users, audits, like I mentioned. And these can be difficult things to manage when budgets are tight and difficult to manage. So I want to just I think it's an interesting topic that might be worth deeper exploration as we look at multi-type libraries also. So the next topic I wanted to kind of shift to was something we discussed as being, we thought particularly interesting, was the variety of ways that academic libraries get their budgets, because again, not being a monolith, our budgets kind of drive so much of what we can do. So I thought I'd just give you like the nutshell of how an academic library budget is born, in a sense, right? Because most of our operational expenses, like all the utilities and everything, are managed by our parent institution. So we're kind of relieved of thinking we don't have to really worry about those at the library level as much. But everything else in our budget really is an allocation from the institution. Sometimes salary and benefits are managed separately, but our operational budget really just focuses on, how we're going to do our work in many ways. However, student worker budgets may be a federally funded federal work study program budget though. So we're getting a little bit of federal funding. But then that library, as part of the institution, may be receiving internal or external grants, or may have endowed funds that a foundation has set aside for them. So that is operational money. We do have some supplemental funding coming in. And then depending on the kind of library it is, there could be some sources of revenue, typical that we see in all kinds of libraries around fines or services that we might provide for a fee. But what is common many times is for that money doesn't really come back to the library itself. It usually goes to the institutional budget. So we charge a fee, but we don't actually many times see that. We don't see that revenue in our department. So it does definitely take some of the motivation out of why would charge for something if it doesn't come back to you. And then we put the chart on the handout that just kind of, I think, clarifies at the institutional level, again, the relationship that our libraries as part of our colleges have with our constituents based on our funding. I really did miss a line on here though. I think there's, I didn't think of it at the time though, but federal funding really is kind of a separate line on here, aside from state allocations. But we're all being driven by tuition. We all may have some kind of revenue sources, like I mentioned, grant funding. We may have donations and friends groups that support us. But it's the community colleges and universities that are, getting some kind of allocation from the state or pass-through funding from the federal government. But then community colleges more specifically have that extra relationship of a good chunk of our funding coming from our district. So that puts us in a very different relationship with the people that are in our community. We're a resource for anybody who walks in the door, but the people who live in our district have a very strong sense of buy-in and relationship with the college. And that really translates to the library itself in many places. I know at our library, we like to kind of define ourselves sometimes as the district's academic library. Like we're the academic library for the district. So it's kind of a different spin on what our role is. Of course, tuition and fees are very contingent on enrollment, which can go up and down. Some of us are, some types are in kind of a downward trend right now, but it's holding more steady at the university level right now. Community colleges are getting hit right now. The out-migration of students out of Illinois is another big driver of enrollment, of course. So we're always watching that. Population variability. There's just less students right now coming up through the ranks. So these things are some things we can't really control, but they have a very deep impact on how well we'll be funded year to year. Obviously, any fluctuation at the state level in terms of budget support can have a pretty big impact as well. But there are some additional grants that kind of come through from the state that sustain many parts of our operation in unique ways, particularly around career and technical education, adult education, adult basic education. And then there are a number of competitive and special initiative grants. If you've never gone on the IBHE, Illinois Board of Higher Education website, if you've ever dug into there, I encourage you to do so. There's lots of really great reports and graphics and things that break down how education is funded and what programming looks like. You can look at it all sorts of different ways and maps, and I kind of got sucked into it working on this project. I've been there before, but I just kind of went deep dive and couldn't pull myself out. Anyway, I think it's really helpful to think about libraries through that lens. So I encourage you to do so. Sarah, you're up.
Just checking, sorry. We want to talk a little bit about the pandemic response because the pandemic has really affected our libraries and our library workers differently. So we're seeing that we've had to, if we didn't already have online services, then we had to implement them. And then of course, we had to refine them via text or chat, video conference and email. That's been a big pivot for a lot of libraries. There's been an increased need for electronic collections that mirror or replace physical collections, but not necessarily the budget to back up this need. And that's been a big stress this year this past year in considering collections. And then adding digitization services, print job, virtual study rooms, semester loans with computers and hotspots. All of those things are labor and or money, and that's been a particular constraint this past year. Staff meeting remotely has, and this is actually kind of a good thing, has created more opportunity for part-time staff or staff who just wouldn't otherwise have the chance to participate in training and projects. And there's been new opportunities for leadership as well. And then, you know, our users have some frustrations. The staff that are answering the questions are not on site with the staff who are actually managing services such as grab and go. And that's been, I think, sort of ongoing as well. Jen?
Yeah, you know, and I think we actually just said there wasn't much more to say here. I would second what you had said.
That's great. All right. So I'll just go ahead and talk a little bit about higher ed trends. I listed a few here, but we're not going to touch on all of them. It's just a few parting thoughts here. Mission creep and advocacy in particular, I wanted to talk about. For example, faculty versus non-faculty librarians. We don't have a cohesive academic library identity. So for example, the conversation that we had earlier when I was talking about our collections, we approach collections, we approach the way that we operate differently. And then I was thinking about how our institutions view us. So an example of this is my own example from how, you know, NIU views itself as a research institution. It is a research institution, but that vision of themselves as a research vision, that research vision doesn't necessarily always remember to include the library in its collections. So something I think I've talked about the many years that I've been in librarianship is how an institution, a university will talk about the library being the heart or at the heart of the institution, but you know, that doesn't get backed up with action or budget. Academic librarians often find themselves advocating and educating up. So to the administrators or institutions saying things like, you know, if we're going to add that program, it'd be nice to have the collections to go with that program. But it's also about the importance of higher ed in general in the state and in other places. Jim was saying to me the other day that libraries are tools, things, and people, which I thought was a really interesting way of framing this conversation too, because we are our building and we are our collection, and those things are really, really important, because if we don't have a building, if we don't have a collection, then we're not really a library. But we also have to talk all the time about how we're actually more than this. We're constantly sort of trying to underscore our relevance and in conversations with administrators or in the state. And then there's reorganizations within our institutions that I think are really important to touch on. The library leaders, the person of record, may not have a library background. This is a little more of a trend right now. It's like Library Plus. So Carly released a statement on this in April 2020, and in brief, this statement indicates that there's a growing number of academic libraries in Illinois that are not filling their director role once a director leaves, and they might designate those responsibilities instead to some other campus administrator like a VP or a provost. Carly points out that a dedicated director is important because this role ensures synthesis between the library and the campus and advocates for resources, learning support, and the needs of faculty and students. And I'm thinking it's probably not a hard sell to say a library needs a dedicated director. And then mission creep. So a lot of libraries have, they're one of the largest buildings on their campus often. They'll have spaces inside the library that are dedicated to other institutional services. So for example, like a writing or tutoring center, testing centers, ID card services, technology services, et cetera. These additional services get people in the library who might not have been there otherwise, and would maybe not go there otherwise. So it's really a very synergistic relationship. But these services take away valuable space within the library, and they leave the library with less space for already cramped collections, less space to provide our own services. A library always belongs to larger institutions. So those spaces sometimes seem up for grabs without much consideration for the needs of the library itself. And that's what I was saying again about like having to advocate all the time about what we actually do and how relevant we are to the university.
Yeah, and I'll just, something I didn't underscore before, but the college, the university's financial health itself, or their views on libraries or institutional priorities in many ways are the biggest drivers of how well the library may be funded, and being buried somewhere deep in the org chart can have a very big, deep impact on how the library is funded. And it can change quickly given all the change that we see. I read
I was going to jump in right there. Is that okay? I think that also has a lot to do with faculty versus non-faculty as well. If you have, if your librarians are considered faculty, they tend to have more visibility on campus because they're faculty, so they're working with other faculty. Non-faculty librarians, of course, are still there. They're still visible, but maybe it's a matter of respect.
There's agency that comes with faculty status that can really buoy your library, or it can be a real drag if you don't have that kind of relationship with faculty across campus, and administrators may view their role very differently. But I was going to say that I read a quote yesterday that, and I don't know how much of any truth this is based on, but it rings true to me that 80% of academic library funding is based on politics. And I thought, God, that just sounds so true to me. I probably it's exclusive to us, but it really resonated with me. I would just add that among a lot of the higher ed trends, I thought something that might be of interest to this group particularly also is how there are increasing state mandates that create relationships between academics and K-12. And that's something that Jenna was, kind of talking about as an advocacy opportunity. But I think we actually have a backbone to work on with new requirements that we have dual credit relationships between public institutions and high schools. And this is a huge area of development. And many times we're sharing the same student. We actually have a co-relationship with that student for a brief time while they're in a dual credit, dual enrollment scenario with us. There's also state mandates and funding associated with math and English transitions programs, which are all about trying to smooth out those disparities in how people are prepared to enter higher education. So again, I think there's already infrastructure in terms of legislation and in terms of law and funding behind building those relationships. And I really see that as a nice opportunity for libraries to build out a relationship. The last piece of that is that many 2-year and 4-year institutions already have pathways of transfer between them where they're starting in one institution and completing at another college. And so, there's lots of alignment happening. And I think it's a wonderful trend that we could really lean into as libraries in terms of capitalizing those relationships that are already in place. So we've added some links at the bottom of the handout to give you some places to go do some exploring. There's all sorts of big trend reports that are put out all the time that kind of give you a point-by-point breakdown. But we'd love to know if any thoughts you have or questions you may have for us.
We could probably talk about this quite a bit. I hope that we didn't gloss over too much.
Past 3, so I'm sure nobody has any questions after 3, right?
So this is Becky, I have a really general question, because since I've been on the board, I've really been educated by Jenna and with all the work with ISLE about how Rails can help the school libraries. But I don't know if I see how Rails can help the academics as much from your, and I'm not saying it's your fault. Like I'm hoping that that's our path, right? Because we've really gotten into more with the schools, which is super important. And we're seeing great things happen through that. So where is it that Rails can get in and really start helping with some of these trends and issues and concerns?
Databases.
Well, yeah,
I think it's databases.
Because you mentioned dual credit, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my daughter did dual credit with Moraine Valley, and my son's in dual credit with Indiana University. I don't know why it's not U of I, but it's Indiana. And I'm like, yeah, they have access to the library. Oh my gosh, that's true. That's great. But
that's a big deal.
Okay,
yeah,
so
I think the delivery we cannot underestimate how important delivery is. Between our institutions, because especially with Carly, it being such a robust consortium, where I can borrow something from the U of I, can borrow something from Southern, and it needs to then get to me in a way that's relevant to me. It can't show up 2-4 weeks later.
So it sounds like, though, there's this education piece that's missing between, which I know this too from working in libraries, between the academic library and some of their academic institutions. So is there how we're going to the ISLE conference and we're presenting, are there academic not library, but like academic conferences where Rails could go in and talk about the library. So it's not you guys, like you said, I thought that was really good. You said how not everyone will listen to us based on our status, but like, could Rails go in with Sarah and Jennifer and present something at your conferences that aren't for the libraries, but more for the institutions?
About 6 or 9 months ago, Dee and I were having a conversation about, I'm not even sure, Dee, how long ago it was now, but we were talking about this, and I mentioned that there's the ICCCA conference, which is the Illinois Community College Administrators Conference.
Okay.
And it's co-sponsored with the Illinois Community College Faculty Association. That's just the community colleges. Now, so there's parallel venues for other places to think about these things. But I think in terms of raising library awareness issues and thinking about libraries as a resource for the whole spectrum of education, right? We have to think, I think we are missing some opportunities to think about ourselves on one big continuity, one big continuum of educating the people of the state and being a resource for learners of all stripes. I think there is an audience there. I think we could probably do some digging and really target some populations and try to educate them about what our relationships with other libraries means and what supporting statewide initiatives means for not just the people in their own institution, but for their whole community. Because I mean, the public colleges have a responsibility to be economic development engines for their region. I mean, that is kind of baked into what you're supposed to be doing. So if we're not thinking about how education relates to economic development, we're kind of dropping the ball a little bit. So anyway, so that's one piece I'd definitely say. But I would also say that Rails is a multi-type organization, and some of these problems that we're talking about in alignment are multi-type problems. So I think that coordination, getting outside of our silo, is one of the bigger ways that Rails can really be a connector around creating conversations and identifying partners. I know we already have some grants that are multi-type, but maybe we need to think a little bit more broadly about support around a specific problem that's multi-type. Think multi-type problem, multi-type organization. And that seems like an interesting space to explore.
Well, I can tell you, I'm like horrified, Sarah, that Carly had to do a position paper on why a director is important. Like, that scares me. Like, that's a place where Rails can be helping.
And these, not all of these schools that are not replacing the director with a director are like, very small schools. I'm not going to name a school, but I can think of one off the top of my head that's actually a really well-known university. And the director is actually an associate provost, I think.
Like, that's not okay. I'm sorry. Like, that makes me really upset. Yeah.
It goes with the mission creep thing. When we start looking for these synergies, which have benefits, we tend to decentralize the idea of library and what's unique about that. And it's serving a larger institutional priority, and without a lot of agency many times to change the way that unfolds. Many times I have colleagues that have learned after the fact that the IT student help desk is moving into the library. Oh, by the way, they're coming in. They weren't consulted before it was decided. That's not an uncommon story. So the institutional priorities really trump a lot.
So, for example,
well, the issue
we lost a very large space that had previously been the cataloging department because we had wanted to put in like a learning commons there. So we identified that space as space that could possibly go. But the university was like, well, if you don't need this space, and now it's actually it actually belongs to, well, it's being leased to Discover Card.
Oh my God.
And I'm not trying to disparage my own institution because one, it's not wise, and then two, because I think that we've made a lot of good decisions as well, of course. Like those, like the card. I don't even want to call it like a business. It's like, like there's opportunities there for our students to do like internships and such. That's really good for our students. It's just not great for a library that frankly really needed that space.
The other thing Rails does.
Well, the issue of the library director is multi-type, right? I mean, we see public libraries where they're not appointing trained librarians. Certainly, school libraries, they're getting rid of librarians completely. Special libraries, we heard from Hallie as well. I mean, talk about a shared problem. Yeah.
And that might be interesting to find out how pervasive the issue is across the different kinds of libraries in the state then. I mean, I think that statement from Hartley was really helpful. You know, we could certainly have a statement like that from Rails, or could we not?
I think a statement would be interesting. Just second that. But I also think that not having those those people with trained library leaders in places blunts our ability to advocate from our position. You know, we are more reliant on organizations to advocate on our behalf because the person who is in the room, in the chair, doesn't have the subject knowledge to really defend and promote the arguments. So that's a big issue.
Well, I won't bring up the word standards, even though I just did, because we worked on that for years and years and didn't really get where we needed to be because, you know, there's standards for school librarians that aren't enforced by that board. There's no standards for special library. Well, there's standards for some kinds of special libraries, but not all special libraries. And we know that, you know, there aren't any standards for public libraries. We're trying to work on training and we are trying to get a picture of what's going on out there, but it's a big problem, a growing problem.
So maybe that's where we start. I mean, maybe that's where we think about putting some of our energy and resources is to.
We have been.
No, I know, I'm saying though, but yeah, but maybe we can get more people behind it, especially because we've worked so hard to include the other types, like the work we've done with school libraries, where I think the general public is starting to even hear about the problem with school libraries not being staffed with library. Like that's something I hear people talk about that I didn't before outside the library world. So maybe now we're finally getting some traction and we've done enough work as Rails, really embracing our multi-typeness. So I don't know. These have been great, these reports. So
it's a very different kind of advocacy though, right? Because the decisions are being made within the institution. You know, they're not being driven by the community more broadly. Right. So it kind of requires a different sort of advocacy too for academic libraries. I'm sure everyone's got their uniqueness, but this one, it's not the stuff that people tend to go to the community college board or the university board or the board of trustees. That's not the sort of thing they usually go and complain about. My public library, you know, our college library doesn't have library leadership in charge. It's a little too esoteric for the public to really get behind, you know.
True. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Fascinating.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Jennifer. We appreciate that. Okay, item number 11, Rails board member reports. Does anyone have any news to share about their area or library? Any programs, anything going on at their libraries? Okay. Okay. Item number 12, agenda building for the next Rails board meeting. The next board meeting will be held on Friday, March 26th at 1 p.m. Items for the agenda include an update on the unserved, including legislation and Rails plans for extending service for all, and a report from the Universal Service Committee. Anything else? We also talked about the bylaws. Anything else?
No, not that I can think of. I think we won't have anything on the area and per capita grant till April.
And EDI is not meeting again until
April.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. So at this time, thank you all for your attendance, and I hereby adjourn the meeting at 3:14 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a great
everybody.
weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.